Hello, everyone. We're here for episode 25 of Washed Up. I'm Colin. This is Abby. We're in Washington, D.C., bringing you the latest news so you don't have to listen to the legacy media that your grandparents do.
Welcome to episode 25, the Quarter Quell.
And unfortunately, this might be a little bit more of a somber episode. As I'm sure everyone knows, last week was kind of a heavy news week with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And so we're probably going to be dedicating this almost nearly the whole episode to talking about that. Um, Probably start with like laying out the facts of what happened and maybe our initial reactions as the news was coming in. So do you want to kick it off, Abby?
Yeah, I think so last week, Charlie Kirk was speaking at the University of Utah when he was shot. And at the time, it wasn't an initial, like, oh, everyone knows that he's dead. He was rushed to the hospital. And within the hour, I want to say, is when it was announced that he had died from the gunshots. Um, he was speaking to a full crowd. His family was there, and that includes his wife and his children. Initially, I remember everyone was talking about like what happened and if he would survive. There was also a video going around as well. And I just want to say that both Colin and I have not watched the video by choice, not because we aren't able to find it, mostly because I've heard that it's very gory and I do not want to see that. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I would second everything you just said. I think he was at Utah Valley
oh,
University
Utah
though,
Valley
but
University.
and he was also 31 years old. And yeah, as you said, he was declared dead within a couple of hours of the news breaking that he had been shot. Um, and there was a brief window there where there was some kind of like hope or optimism that like he might survive, and that was a very intense window of time. Anyway, it was like at the end of the workday on Wednesday, and I had gotten like a notification on my little like work laptop that gives breaking news updates, and it said he'd been shot, and I texted you immediately and said like, did you hear that he'd been shot? And I was kind of holding on hope. A bunch of commentators from like more the right-leaning side of things went live on their different platforms, podcasts and whatnot. And so it was kind of this collective like holding of breath, like maybe he'll make it. Because he was rushed to the hospital immediately, and there was initial reporting that like he still had a pulse at the time that he made it to the hospital, although we can't really confirm that independently. Um, and a lot of people were just on X or on social media saying like pray for Charlie Kirk. And I'm not particularly one to like pray. I have other sort of ways of conversing with like the beyond, and I those kind of work for me, but I was saying a prayer in my head, hoping that he would survive just because I think that the implications of him dying are a lot worse for our country than if he had been shot. It would have been horrible, but we could have kind of avoided some of the worst stuff that might come out of this. So anyway, he was pronounced dead, and I felt immediately horrified. But there was kind of a range of reactions, and I'm curious, what did you think? Or did you see what was the reactions that you were seeing initially?
I want to start off with my reaction. Like you said, the first person that I heard it from actually was Colin because I was working and I wasn't really on my phone that much or looking at other things. And I received your text and you had said something like, oh, Charlie Kirk was shot. And I think you had said next, like some people say that he died or something like that. I think other friends of mine were texting me and being like, "Are you watching the news right now? Like, this is crazy. Is it true that he's dead?" And when all that news came in, that's kind of when I think social media blew up. I think that we were off camera talking about how so many people had reactions, whether that be on the left, the right, or all across the political spectrum, honestly, like everyone was posting about this. I think that people who like don't even really keep up with the news or like didn't really even know who he was if you're that offline of the news were even starting to listen to him slash like do things to research who he was. At least that's in my experience because I have some family members who are not very newsy per se and were telling me like, oh, I looked up what this guy was all about and looking at all these things, and that's the extent of how many people, I guess, knew about his death within the first week,
Mhm.
day, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a very immediate outpouring of, I would say, grief, for the most part, and a lot of the people who I have on social media follow were taking that stance of like, this is a tragedy. What this means for our country is horrific. The state that we're in with political violence, and I think that was kind of our initial reaction as well. I mean, I can't speak exactly for you, but I think my initial reaction was just horrif I was horrified, and um, I don't think there's ever a situation where that kind of violence is justified. It doesn't matter how someone falls on the political spectrum. And like, I personally don't really agree with a lot of what Charlie Kirk probably had to say. He's a fair bit more conservative than me, but like, that to me is completely beside the point. I think that a lot of times these assassinations and the violence against political figures is meant to terrorize the rest of us and people who look up to Charlie Kirk. It's meant to make them afraid to now speak their mind. And as as our viewers know, like, we're all about free speech and having open dialogue. And so the chilling effect that it's going to have on people who otherwise would feel very strongly and have a lot to say, they're going to now have second thoughts about sharing their opinions. And that to me is terrible.
I think I have a pretty similar stance when it comes to free speech. Like I said before, I think that, or I said to you off camera before, is that I do not agree with a lot of what Kirk stood for. I think that he was, like you said, like way more conservative than I am. And I didn't like that he was spewing all these things that I didn't agree with, but just because I didn't like it doesn't mean that I think he isn't allowed to. I don't stand with it at all, but I think it's an important thing to be able to look at things from multiple perspectives in a way of like if somebody is saying all these things, then it should grow your opinion to fight back in a way without physical violence, I think. Like, I think it's really important to stand up for what you believe in, no matter what. And there were a lot of things that I don't believe in when it came to what Charlie Kirk often preached. And I do think that there were so many young people who would like go to his things who didn't agree with him or who would speak out against him and learn how to defend themselves better in their opinions. And I think that is the important part of, I guess, spoken discourse. I think we have talked a lot about how spoken discourse is supposed to better our society and like better how we're understanding things in the moment that it's happening. And I honestly think that's a huge part of why we started our podcast to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I think like debate that's undertaken in good faith has the potential to strengthen both sides of any argument. And so even if you completely disagree with someone's point of view, just by nature of engaging with them, you're strengthening your own argument, and it's making you think about things in a way that you might never have thought about it, which actually makes you more effective at advocating for whatever it is that you have to say. So from that standpoint, I think like all good faith debate should be encouraged. And unfortunately, it was, in my view, Charlie Kirk, what he represented, especially to Gen Z, was someone attempting to engage in good faith in debate. And so he was sort of like the representative of that to a lot of people. Not necessarily to me because I've only encountered his work kind of tangentially, various clips on social media, especially leading up to like Trump's second his reelection. But for people who did really follow him closely, he was sort of the embodiment of that principle. And so to see that cut down at such a young age and so violently, like I said, I just think it's going to have a ripple effect on the culture and on Gen Z in particular.
I think the shock that went through me as well had to do with this ripple effect that you're referencing, in that I'm also just really curious and anxious, I guess, to see what's coming next. I think now more than ever, people are being pit against one another in our country. And without to say, like, I do think there's a lot that's happening that's wrong, and I think that a lot of violence is wrong. When it comes to political violence, I have been seeing a lot of more right-leaning people posting about this and saying how the left is going crazy and deranged and whatnot. But political violence is not a new thing, and it is not only savvy to the left,
Right.
which is also something that I think needs to be said as well. In the same way that I think that violence of all sorts has been happening, and the people who are very much mourning his death for this reason, I think aren't looking at the full perspective in the same way that I think that the people who maybe are like cheering about his death also are not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like there's a huge historical precedent for violence against people in positions of power and leadership, and that cuts either way. It doesn't matter what someone's like partisan affiliation is. Because I think ultimately it's not about right versus left politics. I think each act of political violence is meant to terrorize, and that's not an exclusive to one party or the other. And you can kind of go down like a laundry list of US presidents who've had assassinations or attempted assassinations. I mean, like Lincoln, McKinley, more recently, Donald Trump had some shots against him, JFK, obviously. Um, and in the civil rights era, obviously MLK Jr. was assassinated, Malcolm X was assassinated. And so, yeah, like this isn't something, and Bobby Kennedy Jr. and so a lot of people actually have been making reference back to the 1960s because that was a period where you had a lot of back-to-back assassinations take place, and it felt very much like the temperature was just ratcheted way up, and like, how are we ever going to get back to a place of normalcy? I would say that is how it kind of feels lately. And it is a lot of the violence is coming from the left lately, but I don't think we should fall into the pitfall of thinking that it's exclusive to the left, as you said. But the more recent examples that come to mind certainly are like Luigi Mangione, again, the two attempts against Donald Trump last summer, and then now this one against Charlie Kirk. And also the Minneapolis shooting that was just about a
Right.
week and a half ago, or 2 weeks maybe, also seemed to be ideologically motivated against Christians in that case. Um, so I think, like, yeah, it's troubling that people rush to pin it on one side or the other, but I can also see the argument that it is trending in one particular direction at this moment in time.
And I think it's also because people are feeling so angry and like passionate about certain topics, which I would never ever want to take that away from people. But I think, like, how do you think that we should grapple with the way that political violence is falling right now in this moment?
I mean, yeah, that's sort of the million-dollar question at the moment. I think we can only fall back to what has proven to work in the past. And as we talked about earlier, the civil discourse is kind of the only outlet that I see strengthening things. Like I think that both sides of the aisle need to come together in situations like this and have one voice condemning the violence. Unfortunately, that's not really how it's shaken out there has been a lot of people, more of the left, like you had alluded to earlier, celebrating, and that I think is despicable. But people of both sides recognizing that this isn't a partisan issue, coming together over it. I'm not saying anything profound here, but there is a quote that comes to mind from Freud where he said, that civilization began when someone hurled a word instead of hurling a stone. And I think that that speaks to the political moment we're in, quite a bit, because when you start to see the breakdown of the norm of civil discourse, we're kind of reverting back to like a state of nature, or like what's more maybe familiar to like human nature. And that demands that we take active steps to get back to a place of discourse as the primary way of resolving conflict and restoring balance between the different um, branches of government, I think would help because it would make people feel like they have a voice, even if they don't agree with the president or their congressperson, they still have a voice in the fight. It's not just like a one-party rule or unilateral rule.
Yeah, I think that people not feeling like they have a voice and not being able to make change is a huge reason why a lot of anger and like ignorance stems from. Like I think that speaking out and actually participating in these conversations can do a lot more good than maybe people might think. I really like the quote that you referenced. Like I totally agree with that. I think that there's a lot to be said about violence all over the world right now, and in our country especially, like when it comes to like I guess like this quote trend of left-leaning people maybe committing more political violence right now. Like you said, it's less about the party and about recognizing that it's not a new thing,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And also like looking, I think is important to look at like why this is happening in terms of what are their motives, I guess, and making sure to not villainize their motives in the way of in the way that like if they believe that they're fighting for these rights, I don't think that's the right way to go about it, of course. Like I don't think that you should be killing people in pursuit of human rights. Like I think that that in itself is like an oxymoron. But I also don't think it's right to be villainizing these rights when it comes to looking at who these like shooters or people who are committing these crimes are.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. It's like I don't think we should completely write them off as like they have no reason to be angry or to be lashing out. I think like digging deep into people's motives is an important healing thing that like we as a society can do, not because we think that they're correct necessarily, and definitely not in their approach, but just as a as like a baseline way of comprehending is at, what is the underlying cause of the violence that's popping up. And as you were speaking, I don't know why was remembering two other examples of political violence. I remember Shinzo Abe, who's a former Japanese prime minister, was assassinated like a
Hmm.
couple of years back. And for some reason, also Alexander Hamilton came to mind, and like this was before the Republican and Democrats had any kind of foothold in America. So for people to think that like, this partisan violence is sorry, in Abe's case, he's obviously not an American, so he has nothing to do with like the Republican Democrat divide. So yeah, try to see this as not a partisan thing, but look beyond that at what is the underlying reason. And um, unfortunately, like sometimes people taking a principled stand is enough to pay, get people agitated against them and come after them. But we should look into and explore the underlying reasons why the agitator is being so motivated to act as they are. Do you want to get into a little bit about the suspect that they apprehended and maybe some of what has emerged about his background.
Yeah, I believe that the suspect is a 22-year-old white young man. Um, I believe that he is in his ideology like more left-leaning, and that was like released maybe yesterday, I think.
I think he was apprehended Friday morning. It was like 33 hours after the shooting. And as you said, he was 22 years old. And they came t I've been hearing reports that his family is registered Republican, leans more right, but that the alleged shooter, who they have in custody now, had been trending left in his ideology and thinking that he was living with a partner, romantic partner, allegedly, who was transgender, transitioning from male to female, and that some of the inscriptions that were found on the bullet casings at the scene indicated some, well, it was kind of like nonsense, as these things often are. The messaging that the shooters leave behind is oftentimes incomprehensible, if not contradictory to itself. But in this case, there were some allusions to the shooter potentially having been motivated by like being pro-transgender or gender politics, and that being a motivator, because Kirk was obviously a more conservative Republican who um, was not in support of of like LGBTQ issues or
Yeah.
population necessarily. So I don't know. Did you hear anything about that? And obviously, like we can't really come to any conclusions. We're kind of speculating, but we are basing our speculation off of other reporting that outlets have been doing.
Yeah, I was listening to a little bit about like the description of the suspect. It before the suspect was put into custody, I guess. I think that there was a lot of like wildfire about who it was, who the committer of the crime was. I think a lot of people were already jumping at the fact like, oh, this has to be like a ideological crime, and like yes, it ended up being that might be like a
Probably.
probably
Probably,
yeah.
definitely, probably.
Yeah, a main motivation, but I do think that that was like something that was in the air already, like everyone was talking about it. Um, I think that also on the other side, this doesn't mean that it's like a villainization against trans people at all. I think that this action has brought more even like harm than good when it comes to maybe the motivation behind what the crime is intended to be. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, if this person was intending to like bring justice to trans folks, I can't see that happening. Honestly almost more afraid for their lives right now, and I'm more afraid for like in the same way what's going to happen in terms of political violence and like and how politicians might be more scared to come out and how their families might be like I just don't see it as any other form of like of just more violence spurring, I guess.
Right, like we can investigate the ideological background of the supposed shooter and what might have motivated them, but at the end of the day, um, like you said, whatever cause that they seem to be acting on behalf of, they might actually be causing more damage to, and we can't assume that they're acting from a logical place to begin with, because a lot of times they are so like inundated or brainwashed with whatever ideology that they're subscribing to, and it's almost not even about the ideology that they're subscribed to, it's just the radicalization of it, and the way that people get like swept up in these narratives and ideas that seem like it's like the most important thing ever, but really it's being manipulated. So yeah, in this case, the like encryption or writing on the bullet casings. alluded to, as we said, like gender ideology, and maybe that was something that motivated this shooter. But there was also just a lot of like nonsense. He had alluded to being like anti-fascist. On one of the casings, it said like, "Hey, fascist, catch," and another one was like, Bella
Yeah,
Ciao, Ciao
Villachow.
Ciao," which is like some anti-fascist song from like Italy in the day. And so again, there's just kind of this like underlying incoherence to what this shooter's motivation appears to be. Because if you're really anti-fascist, then I think you would recognize that violence is in and of itself kind of a fascistic thing to undertake. For you to take someone else's life puts you as sort of like the arbiter, the central, like, I don't know, an actor of power in a way. It's almost like I see violence as sort of a fascistic act. If you take fascism to its extreme, you end up with violence, in my opinion. And so for the shooter to, I don't think the shooter was thinking at a sophisticated level. I think that that would have gone completely over his head when he's like writing these messages on the bullet.
Yeah, that I think that like the messagings in the bullets and everything that's been said about, I think that the word fascist too is like thrown around so often and people don't often understand like what it is. Like, do I think that there are like fascist like tendencies going on within our government right now? Like, yes, I do. Like, do I think that there are a lot of things wrong with the way that things are working right now? Like, yes, I do, but we can't often fight fire with fire, I guess, is
Mm,
what I think I'm trying to say. Like
yeah.
at the foundation of everything. This kind of like loosely reminds me of um in like my political science capstone class, we were like talking about like how to change the way that things are trending right now. And at the time it was 2024, before Trump was elected. And when it came to the divide and bringing back democracy, like that was a class, it was called A Republic If You Can Keep It. And one of the things we talked about was how no matter what the left does, like the right is not going to change their mind in that way, and like vice versa. Like it has to come from like the inside out. It has to come from, like those Republicans who are speaking out and being like, this is wrong. Like Trump is not doing and saying what he's doing in terms of what a traditional like Republican is supposed to stand for. Like it's more authoritative than it should be.
Yeah, like the people on the right who are the most affected by this, I think unfortunately it's kind of incumbent on them to now be the bigger person, and that's probably the hardest thing to
Right.
hear in the aftermath of so much grief and like yeah, like this outpouring of pain that a lot of people on the right are experiencing. So now to be called upon to behave as a bigger person and to do like a self-analysis and to not stoop to the level of the violent person who acted against what they believe and the person that they cared about. I know that that's like a huge ask that feels almost unfair, but I do agree with you that I think if we're gonna tamp down the temperature in any meaningful way, it's gonna have to probably come from the right. Um, well, it's gonna have to, it's everyone has to do kind of a soul searching in the wake of something like this, but I hope in particular that the intelligent people on the right um, honestly can take up Kirk's message, which I think was pretty, it was about having that respectful discourse and being, I think, self-reflective about like what is a meaningful life and how do we come together as a society to, like you said, like bridge these divides. And my hope is that we can come out of this tragic situation um, in a some way more unified, even though that seems very unrealistic right now to ask. Um, and to your point too about the fascist tendencies of our current government, I would say that whatever complaints people have about Donald Trump, which I probably would agree with, to take out someone who helped get him elected is extremely anti-democratic in every sense. Um, you can dislike the elected leader and you can hate his message, but I think like he was elected by a popular vote in the last election, and just because someone like Charlie Kirk helped him get reelected, that doesn't make Charlie Kirk in any way a fascist. He was helping him through the democratic means that we've set up through our system. And so again, the fact that they kind of targeted Charlie Kirk seems incomprehensible to me, even though I see what they were doing.
Right.
They saw him as a Trump ally and thought like, oh, this will send a message against the right. And yeah, to me, there's just no basis. There's no justification that would suffice.
Something else that we were talking about, I think over text, was how, at least I brought this up, how even if you were to do something like, even though this has been enacted and Kirk is now dead, I only think that it further ignites the right, like kind of like what I was talking about earlier about the if the shooter wanted to do this to send a message, it's almost putting like flame under the fire, and now he can be seen as more of like a martyr for their cause, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
It kind of reminds me of also like when Trump's near assassination happened, and we like and also other friends of mine, we were talking about like what would have happened if Trump actually died, like how different things would be, and also how crazy it would have been for the more conservative side in that he would be literal Jesus to them. Like he would have been their martyr in that way.
hmm We've seen like kind of early signs that that is happening. People very close to Charlie Kirk have already declared him to be a martyr and are already, in some ways, I think at best you could say they're just amplifying his message, and I think at worst you could say they are in some ways capitalizing off of it. I completely understand people's reactions to intense grief, and I don't think we should try to dictate the right and the wrong way for people to express that grief. But I also worry about what you're saying of declaring someone a martyr as a way of justifying any sweeping action that
Right.
now you want to enact. Is it really coming from a place of trying to avenge that person, or are you just acting out your own agenda on using their name?
Like is this just a means to pull forward like the overall right agenda?
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly heard people express that concern too. So I'm
Like I'm
not
concerned about that a little
right,
bit.
right. I worry about the crackdown that could come for free speech in general. I think it was Vance who was saying that they were going to crack down on left-leaning
Oh, gotcha.
institutions, which to me is a strange way of phrasing it because how do you define a left-leaning institution? And what do you mean crackdown or like abolish? I've heard people say like abolish liberal NGOs, but like who is
Like
going to
what?
be
And also like what does that mean? Like how do you even define that? And like
one?
I said about like the right, I'm gonna say the same like or I'm gonna say the same thing again. Like you can't really like fight the fire with fire in
Right.
that way. Like it's so much to ask to be like, oh my gosh, can you guys please like we all need to meet at the middle in that way. But it is kind of scary that fans would say something like that when oftentimes words that have little to no definition can honestly make such a vague like it could overtake a lot of different types of, I guess, left-leaning institutions.
Right. And I think like Vance was obviously personally close with Charlie Kirk, as was Donald Trump and many people on the right. Vance was he went out to retrieve the casket that Charlie Kirk was in and bring it back on Air Force Two to Arizona. Met with Erica Kirk, who's Charlie's wife, and Usha Vance was there too. They're all kind of like consoling one another. Vance did a podcast episode on Kirk's old podcast. So I can completely understand like the personal reaction that like a politician like Vance might have in this case. But yeah, to then pivot and make it more about like something that's kind of secondary to the actual issue at hand, you could say. Like they could like what are you gonna come after the tax exempt status of certain NGOs or like left-leaning quote unquote institutions? And is that really going to be justice or is that just kind of a
Vengeance.
reactivity? And I don't think public servants should be reactive by nature. I think we need to rely on them to be kind of bulwarks against that kind of, yeah, like you said, vengeance. It's not about that. It's about what's in the public's best good. And in my view, cracking down on institutions that probably don't have anything to do with this specific tragedy is not really going to help.
No, I don't think that either. I don't think that cracking down on anything left, like it goes against, I mean, if you look at what Kirk even said, like everything he was saying because he believed in, and I'm sure that I mean, I didn't intake his content much, but I'm based off of what I have seen, I'm sure that he would not be someone to look at and filter the things that others are saying. Even when I like saw a couple debates he would do with like young, I guess like Gen Zers who are like very left leaning. And in those debates, like sure, he would like cut him off a lot, but he would always say like, "Oh yeah, like it's good to like be able to talk about this stuff." And I think that shutting down speech or ideologies in any way would not be doing our country any good right now.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I do want to touch a little bit more on perhaps some of the negative reactions, or I'm calling them negative reactions that were in some way celebrating or just being very cynical about Kirk's death. Um, I think we've made pretty clear by this point in the podcast that like we obviously kind of blanket condemn political violence as a rule, but other people were posting about because there had also been a shooting that same day at a Colorado high school. And I think a couple of people were um, hurt in that. And people were immediately posting after Kirk was shot and it was announced that he had died about how gun violence spares no one. And they were also circulating this quote by Kirk saying he had made some reference to the fact that if we are to like maintain our rights, specifically the Second Amendment, that you can't prevent all instances of gun violence and that some people will inevitably die as a result of that right that we have. And so people were kind of cynically, in my view, reposting that quote as if to kind of rub it in his face of like, in a way, they were almost saying like he got what was coming to him, which I don't, I have a really hard time connecting with that as an initial response to someone's death. I just think that it's crossing a line and like there is time to have nuanced debate about gun violence and I think we are in an ongoing conversation about that. We tried to have a similar like sit down after the Minneapolis shooting and discuss like what can we do about gun reform as a nation. And we should continue to have that conversation now that Charlie Kirk was shot and killed. But to me, like the people kind of piling on, I've said before, I hate the pile-on effect where it feels like it's not adding to the discourse, it's just rubbing it in people's face. And that to me, we need to be really careful about the messages that we put out. Is it constructive or is it just tearing people down to feel better about ourselves, maybe?
Hmm. And people, I mean, people have can say what they want to say, but it's just about deciding whether or not, like you said, it would even add anything to the conversation. Like at this point, like I'll look at my social media and like see all these things, and I like in like the simplest form, like I don't really even want to see it anymore. Like in both ways. I think it's just creating so many arguments and like a standstill. It feels like talking to a wall.
Yeah. A lot of political conversations do kind of tend to devolve to that point where it's just people getting more entrenched. But I think we shouldn't be despairing that. We should be actively finding new ways of reaching out. But I wanted to ask you, so imagine like we were at our old college newspaper, the Vista, and a student came into the newsroom and had a piece that was like railing against Kirk. How do you think we as an editorial board would have handled that? Because
Well, it's an opinion piece, right? Or is it?
presumably, yeah.
Okay.
Hypothetically, if this were to happen.
Um, as an editorial board, I think, well, what is the opinion like? Oh, Charlie Kirk deserved to die.
Maybe that, but maybe something more like again, like he had what was coming to him, and like let's say hypothetically, the student like used the quote about gun violence that Kirk had that was circulating.
I think that I would, we would have asked the student to look at all sides like we always would do. At the Vista, or yeah, at the Vista, we were never, I don't think, the type to censor anyone in their opinions, even when we all disagreed with. I mean, there were multiple stories where I think a lot of us were like, "Oh my God, this story is, I can't believe this person believes this," but we would edit it a lot and try not to take away their words or their opinion, but make it publishable. And I think that a good opinion piece plays, quote, like the devil's advocate on both ends.
Mhm.
So I think if the student was using this quote a lot, I would almost challenge them to look at, like, I guess, like why this quote was said. What is the other quote side to it, and how can we make this like a more balanced piece without, I guess, hiding their or taking away their words and what they want to say. Like I don't think that this is the only, I guess, form of evidence that would be saying, quote, Charlie Kirk has something coming to him, had something coming to him.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I feel similarly. This was just something that was like coming to mind in the aftermath of everything, and I do think there was very few pieces that we just outright like quashed and said like you cannot publish
I don't
that.
think there were
There was
like,
like maybe one,
was there any
just
like,
because it was like mean-spirited, and we're like I don't see any angle
oh
here.
yeah, okay, yeah.
So there was like one story that I can recall in like
Me too,
3 years
actually.
where we're just like, okay, but like, what's the angle here? Like, why does this matter to our community of readers? But I think with like this instance, if someone came in with a piece,
Like there isn't not an angle. Do you know what I'm saying?
mhm,
In terms of,
but like it could be developed in such a way that it's respectful and also, like you said, like drilling in on the context. I think that's what gets lost in the social media milieu is like you can repost a quote, but what was the context? And if you drill down far enough, I think you often find the context is not really what it appears to be on the surface. And good journalism is that's really what it's all about, is like uncovering um, what is beyond just the superficial. So I think if someone came into our newsroom and had that commentary, we probably would have encouraged them to rewrite it several times before it would be considered publishable. And it probably, like you said, it would have to take the other side into account. That's kind of just a basic rule of opinion writing, or persuasive
journalism
writing.
in general and opinion writing, you can't just, opinion writing, you can't just go in and like say your opinion just to say it. Like that there's an art to opinion writing, which I feel like a lot of people don't realize. And I think it's what our podcast is as well. I think that oftentimes we do bring up maybe what we don't believe in as much. At least I think I do. I think that even we will challenge each other sometimes. Like I think that I'm like more left-leaning than you are, and you'll say things and it'll like have me thinking, and I'll be like, oh wait, yeah, like wait, Colin, that was kind of valid. And then I'll like maybe morph it into something that I've thought of. Or it's the same way if I try to interact with people every day. Like I want to hear everybody and I want to be able to form my opinion in that way.
Yeah. No, I think that that's super valid. And there's always a way, like when people really feel strongly that they have something to say and it's sort of like eating them up inside, there's always a way of saying it that is not going to be incendiary, but is going to be productive. And that's
Hmm.
why I said, like, we'd probably have them write several drafts of it. And I bet by the time they got on their third or fourth draft, it would have been approaching
And it,
like a civil, well thought out, publishable opinion. And this is all hypothetical, of course, but
right.
I'm trying to get across the point of like, if you feel really strongly, and it's coming from even a place of anger or just visceral reactivity, there's always something you can do to process it, refine it, and do something with that feeling. It doesn't just have to be something that you stew on in private or something that you spew out in public. There's a middle ground there that you get by writing and expressing things thoughtfully as a practice. And so I'm proud of what we did at the paper, and I think that that taught us how to do that in a way where like hopefully that carries through with now being on Washed Up.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say about this topic?
I could just do like a quick wrap up. In my view, there's some talk about is this going to affect people's willingness to make public appearances and do public events, especially people on the right who feel like worried that they might be the next like on some list of targets or something. I certainly hope that it doesn't scare anyone from expressing what they have to say. Um, and I hope that it doesn't sort of change the way the society approaches like public events and again, open dialogue. I think inevitably there's going to be some kind of tightening around like security and having open forums. I certainly hope that that doesn't get taken too far. I don't want to see like a pendulum swing, which ironically, this happened very close to the anniversary of 9/11. And to
Hmm.
me, 9/11 is the
The
pinnacle
Yeah,
example.
I was gonna say like that
Like
was such a pendulum swing.
like a tragic event happened in America, and we as a society just went from we did a complete 180, and then it was a complete like crackdown on people's right to, for instance, like privacy with the Patriot Act, and now you have government surveillance and intelligence agencies, and like it just was this monstrosity that grew out of the reactivity of a terrible tragedy. So I hope that we can look at the example of like 9/11 and other examples of tragedies that had ripple effects for our society and not do a complete 180. Again, take the time to kind of center ourselves, reach across the aisle to someone you disagree with, engage in that debate, bridge the divide, refine your arguments, express them productively, don't tear other people down. And I think that's the only way that we can chart a path forward.
Well said. Well said. Okay, so this week my Bury the Lead is a little silly. It is about the summer I turned pretty and how parasocial people are being with particularly this love triangle, which I think is honestly so interesting. And I don't even think it's necessarily a new thing, but for some reason within like our political climate and things like that, like I think that people are really, really, really taking to heart the Team Conrad versus Team Jeremiah to the point that people are genuinely afraid to say that they are a certain team, mostly Team Jeremiah. And people will get into genuine like screaming matches and or physical matches and or like social media matches. When I was talking about how people won't say what they believe in, it honestly I wish that I could like write like a calm criticism paper on this in terms of like political communication as well, because I think that would be such an interesting like correspondence, I guess. It would be such an interesting thing to research and see if there is like this correlation of how people feel right now about, I guess, our political climate when it comes to this very popular show. And it's just, I wanted to bring this up because it's just also so silly and so funny. Because when you look at it like stripped down, it's just this teeny boppy show, silly little show about this girl who hops back and forth between two brothers, which one brother's like quote arguably the better choice. But others like feel differently. And I also think it's really interesting because like, yes, I do have a team, but I think it's been really interesting to see how each side sees the other side. I think that on like YouTube and TikTok, I've been like on both sides, quote sides, I guess, of like who Belly should end up with. And it really just shows me how many perspectives you can have on a certain TV show, on a certain situation, like where one person reads one situation one way, another one reads it the complete opposite, and neither one will ever see each other's opinion because of the algorithm. But for some reason, I've like filtered my algorithm in a way that lets me see both.
Okay, that's very interesting, and we'll circle back. But my buried lead is going to be about AI and some of the concerns I have as it's starting to gain momentum in our culture. I think initially people were really worried about AI like taking their job, and that's sort of less of the concern nowadays. I think people are realizing that AI can actually be really beneficial in terms of driving up productivity for like, I don't know, office jobs. People can use it to get more work done, and it can actually be not something that takes jobs, but I don't know, helps people. But I also have some concerns on other bases. For instance, I think that people can become overly reliant on it, and it kind of stops their ability to critically think. There's a term going around called AI psychosis, which is basically like people become so bought into whatever the chatbot is like feeding them back that it kind of distorts their perception of reality and they kind of go down this like rabbit hole. I have seen this happen to a handful of people, not in my orbit, but like a couple of degrees separation away from me. And it's very concerning because you see the ways that like sort of like with mental illness, it's not really being in touch with base reality, but there's just layers of distortion that they're subscribing to that are preventing them from seeing reality as it is. And so I'm concerned for the mental health implications of AI, especially as people are starting to rely on it for like taking the place of a therapist and they're seeking out like help, which otherwise they would turn to like a real person for someone who's equipped and licensed to maybe give them that advice, but now they're turning to AI. And there's been so recently, Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, was on Tucker Carlson's show talking about this and the troubling trend of suicide rates, people who consult AI when they're feeling suicidal, and then the rate of people who then go on to carry out a suicide. And it's shockingly high and very concerning. And like, yeah, AI might be like a good last resort, but it's still not as good as seeking out another real person's help. And I just wish that people were more aware of the potential that AI could be kind of a rabbit hole, funneling people away from reality as opposed to closer to reality, and we should just proceed with caution. Don't be reactive and don't like stop AI from innovating, but just be mindful. Going to Abby, Bury the Lead. I have not seen this show.
So silly.
I haven't seen it, but I think it was a good, like, it's very lighthearted, which in context of this episode feels like something we needed. So thank you for giving your insights on that.
The reason why I brought it up too is because the season finale, the series finale comes out this Wednesday, and I
Okay.
was just thinking about it, and I was like, damn, what am I gonna do without this show that I and like a lot of others have watched for so long. Anyways, and then I was just thinking about how intense the love triangle has gotten this season in particular, that people like are literally, it's like if you choose Team Jeremiah, it's like saying a freaking slur at that point. Like people are so angry at one another.
So in this show, are you saying that the two guys are brothers?
Yeah, so the two guys are brothers, and
So it's not really a triangle, but it's more of like a the two guys like the girl.
yeah, but it's Belly, Conrad, and Jeremiah, and basically Belly's mom and Jeremiah and Conrad's mom, they went to college together. They're college best friends, and their kids grew up summering together
This sounds
in the
like the
summer
kissing booth.
house.
Did you ever watch the kissing booth? Like
Yes,
Jacob Elordi.
yes, I
Yeah.
did. But like it's like a little bit like I think artsier than that.
Or like cinematic.
Yeah, and people are like so into it, and they grew up summering together in this like it's called Cousins Beach. And a really funny comment that I saw actually was, yeah, the cousins really be cousining in Cousins Beach or something like that. Because at least for me, my family friends who I grew up with and saw like pretty consistently, like those are my cousins. Like I actually like cannot imagine like being interested in a family friend in that way, which I think a lot of people feel the same way about, which is kind of funny. But anyways, I just brought it up because I think that it's so silly how parasocial some shows can get. And I honestly do think like maybe a part of it is like how apt people are to argue nowadays anyways, or jump on one another. Like I was telling Colin before we were recording that I saw this one TikTok about this girl like targeting I guess like the Team Jeremiah people and like they're all like more quote like Republican looking or whatever. And it was just such a silly joke, but there's some realness behind it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it kind of speaks to what our entire episode was about with in terms of like tribalism. Like people want to pick a side and feel like they belong to that group, and then people will like hurl stones at each other based off of like group identification, and that just seems like something that's kind of like central, unfortunately, to like human nature. So whether it's something as serious as like the political divide in America right now, or like a show. Um, it's a strange phenomenon that I really wish we could get a better handle on and understand.
Have you, going back to your bear lead, have you like talked to anybody who has been substituting their therapist with AI, you think? Like, what made you think about
Um,
this? Because I have.
I know one person, yeah, who was doing that, and immediately was, I immediately told them that's a bad idea because I mean, I'm a psych undergrad major. I think there's a lot of good resources out there if you study, like, again, how the brain works and study psychology as a field, which is, I don't know, at least 125 years old, I would say. There's a lot of material there that you can educate yourself and actually use to improve your life and your relationships. And so, to me, the AI is sort of a shortcut that is not going to like supplement someone's life in the same way that actually like serious um, reading and application of these ideas might have. Like, yeah, the AI is probably drawing from the literature that's out there, but it also is kind of prone to telling people what they want to hear, and that's not what you really want in like a therapy setting. Like therapy, like other civil debate, like we talked about, should be you're getting challenged on your long-standing beliefs and like where might you be misperceiving things. AI can't really tell you that in the same way that a trained human being can, who's spent like they've had years of education to discern that type of thing. So.
I also think that there is such a value in humanity and like human nature when it comes to like talking to a person, real living, breathing, lived experience person who can bounce ideas off of you or give you advice or give you actual practices and activities and emotion when it comes to therapy or when it comes to situational advice or when it comes to friends. This actually really, your Bear the Lead really reminds me of, I feel like I've talked about it on this podcast before. Ezra Klein did a podcast about how like Gen Alpha or Gen Z, I forgot which one, maybe the younger part of Gen Z, definitely Gen Alpha, is like the least flourishing generation. And an example that he gave was this mom and his and their son or something like that who was fully relying on AI to like be their this kid's friend and thus they had no like social interaction and there was way too much technology being done there and how a lot of the time like the COVID kids had experienced that as well like how much do you want to sacrifice like I guess shielding your kid from feeling ostracized and bullied when they could like just have an AI buddy versus letting them experience this life and being rejected and maybe not finding friends right away and maybe not knowing the right answer right away or being told, like you said, what you want to be told, regurgitated by AI.
Right. I mean, to me, I think the people who use it in that way as sort of like an imaginary friend fundamentally misunderstand what it actually is. Like, if you know the basics of like what a large language model is, it's basically, like you said, it's regurgitating based off of the likelihood of the probability of the next word being the next word that it spits out. And so it's running these calculations all the time, but it's not like a sentient being that you can actually relate with. Um, and it can get people caught in these like loops because the probability of it telling you what it's going to tell you is like again based off of like a algorithmic calculation based off of what you input. So it's really more like looking in a mirror than it is like having an imaginary friend. For some people, looking in a mirror can be beneficial because it's a form of self-reflection, but it can also become sort of like the myth of Narcissus like staring at his reflection, thinking like that he's the most beautiful and like not being able to form relationships to anything other than his own reflection to his own detriment. So I worry about people using it in that capacity because they fundamentally misunderstand what is a large language model, how does it work, what is it good for, and what is it not. But it is certainly good for some things.
Yeah, AI is, I mean, when AI was first coming out, I was like, there's no way that this is gonna take place of so many different things. But unfortunately, like when you open a can of worms, like it's only going to pop out and expand, I guess. Like you can't I can't sit here and say like never use AI. Like I can't sit here and say that I've never used AI. I think that it only will keep on progressing, and as a society and as humans, we need to learn what's good for it and what's bad for it.
I'm a bit of a Luddite about it. Like I can count on two hands the total number of times I've ever interacted with AI. Like it's less than 10 times because I really am very hesitant and like maybe I'm just a slow adopter to things like this, to technology, and maybe I'll be proven very wrong and maybe that'll cost me in some way, but for right now I'm kind of okay to incur that cost in order to maintain like my own personal stability, sanity, and just feeling like I'm doing my honest best attempt to figure things out myself and not be reliant on like another I don't know, form of technology, you could say.
Right. Anyways, I think I'm all good here.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that wraps it up.
Washed
Washed
up
up
out.
out.